All right. Nobody on yet, but we'll go ahead and get started. Today we're talking about a variety of things. So most of the things are related to finishing prints. So you've printed the thing, and now you want to paint it or sand it or make it shiny or smooth or a variety of different end results that you're looking for. Most of the time, you just print and that's the print. But sometimes you want to do a little bit more than that. Maybe it needs a little work to fit. You know, it's a functional part and it has to fit with other pieces. So how do you do that? Sometimes it's just a ornamental piece and you want to finish out the ornamentation of it. So we'll look at some of those things. I've got some tools over here, some supplies that I typically use, and we'll just go through them. I don't have examples for every one of these, and some of them I don't even have out because they're not things you can really bring out to a table. But let's see. Oh, before we do that, somewhere, yes, I did get our fans in. So if we get through all of our stuff here on the finishing and there's still time left, maybe we'll start installing these fans. It should be pretty straightforward, assuming the problem is the fan itself has gone bad. Now, if the fan hasn't gone bad and there's some wiring problem somewhere, then that could take a little bit more. I think the fan has gone bad because the other side is working. So it makes me think that it's just the fan itself has gone bad. But I am looking at it right now, and I don't actually remember how it's wired up. So I think these fans are parallel, so if one's working, they should both be working, unless one of the fans is bad. But we'll save that for the end if we have time once we've done all our other things. All right, so let's just go to here. These are little calibration prints. These are resin, so it's something I was doing the other, like just a few hours ago, last night, I guess. And we did a little bit of resin printing of, I don't know, maybe last week or the week before. It's recently. And I didn't show you that there are, and this isn't the only one, but there are a variety of test prints you can do to kind of get things honed in. One of the things I didn't talk about was the fact that resin, masked SLA resin anyway, has a tendency to not produce geometrically, dimensionally accurate parts. Like you ask for a certain thing and it may or may not print that thing. In fact, I printed a sample here that we'll look at, and it's clear that it did not do what it was supposed to do. So these little guys, actually none of these are correct. These are 1, 2, and 3. So the progression, you may not even can tell the difference on the camera. I don't know. I think you might can. I think you can kind of see this first one has a little bit less detail than some of the progressively better ones. I still need to keep doing these calibrations to hone in. What you're trying to hone in on is the exposure time in general. So remember, the masked SLA is a UV light source underneath a mask, which the mask is a LCD screen, and it allows that UV light to be exposed to the, well, I guess maybe the other way. It allows the resin to be exposed to the UV light where it's not masked, and the amount of that exposure determines the amount of curing that happens. So if you overexpose, you can get curing kind of beyond the edges of the mask. So you want just the right amount of cure time. And so these are progressively slower cure time. So this was like per layer, this one, I think it was 2.8 seconds, and then gradually getting down to, I think this one might be currently at 2.5 or 4 seconds. I'd have to, oh, actually, I have it right here. Let's see. It is 2.3. So 2.3 seconds on this one. So 2.8, this one was probably 2.6, and then I went down to 2.3, and this one is even still overexposed. It's better, but it's still overexposed. So this is one of the monochrome LCDs, so they generally can expose faster because they can block more light. So you can actually have brighter UV light, more intense UV light sources. Plus, this is a rapid resin, so it does react faster. So I'm still needing to tune that in. So there is some tuning. and you can get better dimensional accuracy. But that's one of the things with the resin printing that sometimes, well, the masked SLA resin printing. There's the laser-based SLA printing that actually has pretty good dimensional accuracy. But this masked SLA, if you're trying to get functional parts that need to interface with one another, then you do have to worry about that dimensional accuracy. Now, if you're just printing, like this is what I was printing, if you're just printing stuff like this, dimensional accuracy doesn't matter that much, right? But on him, you can see the kind of the effect. So I printed him at an angle. So he was sitting back kind of like that. I don't know if it was 45 degrees or not. Oh, it was just like this. It was like that. So not 45 degrees, but I had him tilted back because all of this lattice work structure here you can see is the support material. Even though it's resin, it still needs support material if you're trying to print stuff in midair. So this is the type of support material that gets generated with a resin print. You can do other types, but this is typically what you see. And so I had him tilted back a little bit, and you can kind of see where the bottom part of his base is supported with just a bunch of dots, really. You know, those little dots where the support is touching it or supporting it. And you can kind of tell, you know, back where those dots were, it is not at all smooth, right? And you can kind of see some weird shape there. It's not very nice. So one thing for finishing stuff like that, that will work on FDM. So some of this stuff I will show you a resin example. Some I'll show you most I'll show you a FDM example. Most of these techniques work on either one. It doesn't really matter which one. I will say with the resin, one thing you have to be concerned about is that this guy's not very thick. So sometimes, this one's probably fine, but sometimes you print something that's got a lot of volume to it. And what can happen is the printer, the resin printer, doesn't fully cure every layer. It just, you know, partially cures. I don't know what percent, but partially cures every layer. And those internal layers inside there, like inside his waist where his stomach would be, they don't ever really get exposed to UV light very well. So this one has been washed and cured in the wash and cure station that we saw last time that we were talking about resin. And I'm pretty sure that he is cured, like all the way through. But being an opaque resin, this gray, this is not primer, this is the color of the resin, there's a chance that some of the thicker parts might not be fully cured inside of the volume of his body. And what can happen then is it wants to crack later on. So things you can do to avoid that if you're resin printing and you want to print stuff with lots of volume is most of your slicers have some way to hollow out the part so that it's just not, there's nothing inside it. It's just, you know, a shell. And you can, you know, determine how thick the shell is and all that kind of stuff. The only thing that you have to worry about is that you do have to have a way to get the uncured resin out of there. So there has to be a drain hole or something like that so that there's a way for the liquid uncured resin to come out. Otherwise, it'll always be trapped inside the hollow volume. So you do have to make sure that I don't think this guy is thick enough in any area that I'm going to worry with that. But most slicers do have some way to hollow out the parts. So let me show you, since I have them. I do, once you get your supports, you know, you saw the picture of what the supports look like. That can be intimidating to think they're going to come out really hard, but generally they come out in one giant piece. You know, it just kind of sits there. I don't know if you can tell on the camera about the different colors, but the supports I did not cure, and so you can see that they're a different color than the cured part. The cured part has a little bit of a orangish green tint to it, but in general, you wash it, and then for me, before I cure, I just peel these off, and they generally come out in one big chunk. There was one other little chunk that came out, maybe a few little scraps too, but they're actually pretty easy to remove. It looks like they'd be complicated to remove, but in general, if you remove them but while they're washed but not cured, then they come off pretty easily. All right, so let's go to our finishing stuff. So this guy's got a bad base. He sits fine, but it's it's a little wobbly, doesn't sit quite level, and it just kind of looks bad. So one thing that you do to FDM and to resin prints is sanding. That's kind of like your default thing you do first is sanding. I would say PLA, the FDM PLA is really hard to sand. It's a tough material to sand. It can be sanded, but there are much simpler materials to sand. This resin is actually really easy to sand. You do have to be careful with resin sanding because the resin dust, and this is not true, or this is not specific to printed resin, but just any kind of resin. Resin dust you don't want to breathe, so you want to have a respirator or some way to mitigate that dust going everywhere. Now in this case, I'm not going to actually be sanding him very much. I'm just going to show you a little bit, so it shouldn't be a problem. But there are two main types of sandpaper, and then you've got all your tools, sanding tools. So here's one, and let me get another one. Here's another piece. So obviously they look different. One is clearly more grainy. This one is more grainy than this one. This one's actually for a drywall, sanding tool, but it's the one I found easy to get to. So one thing that's different about these is their texture. So sandpaper comes in different textures, and it can go down to like 36 up to many thousands, 10,000. And that number, so the number's on the back. So this one's 100 and this one is 1,000 down there. So that number is related to how rough the sandpaper is. The smaller the number, the rougher it is. So it's going to be more aggressive at removing material. It's really, I think the number relates to the number of grains per square inch of the sandpaper, but I think it's really related to the sieve that, or the sieve that filters the grains out to begin with. Anyway, small number is very rough. Big number is very smooth. This 1,000 is way smoother than what I would use on most prints. This is more like I'm wanting to make a really shiny surface on a car or something like that. But this is the one I found, so that's the one I'm showing you. That's one difference, is that there's all sorts of grits. So 100's a bit rough for most prints, but usually when you're sanding, you're thinking about the idea that you're going to start with a rough, low number grit sandpaper and work your way up to something, maybe not 1,000, but maybe 300, 400 grit sandpaper, something like that. That's going to be smoothing out. So you start out getting all the really rough high spots, and then maybe you apply some filler. We'll talk about that in a minute, but and then or some primer, and you sand some more with a little bit finer grit and finer grit and finer grit, and until you get the surface finish you're looking for. For this guy, I'm probably not going to sand him at all. It does look like, other than this down here, it does look like, can you see that? Let's see. Yeah, see those spots? Those little white spots? Those are where some of the support material rested. Also, these white spots, like that one right there, those are where the isopropyl alcohol that he was cleaned in didn't get completely removed. So remember, the process is you print, you wash most of these resins in isopropyl alcohol, although there's other cleaners that you can use too. Some are water washable, some are, you can use a different type of chemical to clean them. I used IPA, and when I washed him with water to clean that off, I left some, and so that's kind of the texture. That those white streaks there are kind of what happens to your model if you don't get all the IPA off of it before you cure it. But these little dots here, and there's more on the back, there's a bunch right there, those are where the support, that's where the support material was connected. So he did have some on his face that was separate from this piece here, this piece. And so those I might sand a little bit because, they're a little unsightly. That's also why I tilted him on his back so that most of that stuff is on the back of the model. So sanding will clear up most of that. So what sandpaper do I use? Probably don't use either of these, actually. One other characteristic on these sandpapers is this one. It just says 100. And that's all, there's some brand names, a model name, barcode, and all that. But this one, same, it's got brand names, got a number, but it also says wet or dry. So the wet or dry paper is the one that you can use and do what's called wet sanding. So what that means is you can actually use water. You could usually spray on, this is not water, this is IPA, but you could spray on some water to your surface, and it'll do a couple of things. One, it'll keep your sandpaper from clogging up too quickly. But in a case where you're sanding resin, it will encapsulate those resin dust particles so they're not flying in the air. So that's another way that you can mitigate resin dust and FDM dust and all these other kind of dust, is if you use a wet or dry paper. If you use this one wet, it'll just basically all disintegrate. So if it doesn't say wet or dry on your sandpaper, only use dry sanding. So then there's fine to do that. What you'll notice is you'll probably have to either change your sheets a lot, particularly if you're doing resin, or wipe them off with some kind of towel because they're going to get clogged up pretty fast. So I see a lot of videos, there's a lot of videos of people. I watched one last night. Some guy had 3D printed a truck, like an old Chevrolet truck, and put it on an RC car. And he did a lot of sanding, and he was doing sanding without a sanding block. So there are reasons you might want to do that. Like what I mean with a sanding block is have some sort, here's a tiny one. Actually, this is an eraser, but it works like a sanding block. So a sanding block would be, you have a little piece of sandpaper, and that block is kind of keeping the bottom of surface of your sandpaper flat, or some shape. They don't have to be flat. They can be round and curved and contoured. In fact, I saw this that you could print. There's all sorts of particular shapes of sanding blocks that you can print. So these are all printable ones that you could, maybe you want a flat, maybe you want an angle or a curve or whatever. They probably make, or you could make your own sanding block for little strips of sandpaper. So it's fine to just take your hand and start sanding. It's fine to do that. But it's better if you want a flat surface, like if you're trying to remove high spots from a surface, particularly this is a great example. I want this to be perfectly flat. It's better to sand with a flat surface. So if I were going to sand this guy, I don't think I would, in this case, since it's just the bottom of a base, what I would do is I would get something flat and rigid. So there's just an old cutting board. Tape down or stick down or just hold down my sandpaper, and then I would, sand. I also wouldn't sand like in a straight line too much. I would sand kind of figure 8-ish, something to try and get the high spots. You should start noticing that it's sanding in some areas more than others. Those are the high spots that you want to get rid of. I'm not going to do a lot because I don't want this dust everywhere, but you can wipe it clean. and then keep sanding until you're satisfied with the result down here. If your sandpaper gets clogged up too much, you can try and, this is a dry paper. I can't do wet sanding with it. So you can try and get some of the dust out of there. But that's what I would do. If I were trying to maybe clean up some of this back here, this is going to be tougher. I wouldn't do something like this because this is not a flat surface. In fact, what I'd probably do there is more along the lines of something with these little files. So you can get a pack of like 10 of these files for a few dollars at places like Harbor Freight. They don't have to be super fancy. This one has a 3D printed handle just to make it easier to hold, but I don't know if I could ever get the handle back out of there. I actually think I heated this up and put it in there, so it's probably never coming out. But you can print, if you wanted to, you can print little handles to make them easier to hold. This is probably not the best one, but they make all different shapes on the ends where you can get in there with a different shape to match better whatever you're working on here. And so there are these files. The files you can use wet or dry. It doesn't really make much difference on those, other than your dust particles get trapped a little better if it's a wet sanding. Both of those things apply to FDM or resin. The resin ones do, they produce a little more dust than the FDM, but FDM is going to have dust in it also. I will say that if you do the wet sanding on either one, particularly on the FDM, then you need to wait quite a while or have some way to dry the part. So the resin's not as bad because it's a solid block of resin. So it's not going to entrap water. FDM is not solid, and so there's a chance that if you put a lot of water on that FDM part, then that water is going to get into the layers or into the infill of your part. That's another reason why spraying water is a better thing than just like dipping water or drenching your model in water, because you don't want that water to go into the model. Because what will happen then is, let's say you want to prime, so you got a spray primer or whatever. If there's water in that model and you spray, or even if you paint on it with a paintbrush, that water is eventually going to evaporate or make its way back out of the model, and it's going to ruin that base coat. And the whole point of your primer is that you're creating a nice solid shell around your model to paint on. And so if it's ruined, then anything you put on top of that is going to be ruined also. So be careful wet sanding, particularly on the FDM models, because if you don't do a good job of drying the model, then that water is going to find its way out somewhere at some point in time. It may be as soon as you hit it with paint, or it might be sometime later. So just be careful with that, in the sense that it's better to do a process and let it sit for a while, dry out, cure, whatever the process is, and then come back to it. Let's see. Do I have any other? Oh, here's another little finishing tool up here. Not exactly related to sanding, but this is a useful tool. This is actually a deburring tool. Let's see if I can find a deburring tool on Amazon or something. That's probably where I bought that one. All right, so it's one of these. Well, it's apparently that one, because that's the one I bought. 2021, so it's been a while. These are usually used if you're cutting metal of some kind, but they do have, most of these have replaceable ends. Some of them have an assortment of ends that have purposes for plastic or for printing. I mean, not for printing, for metal, aluminum, steel, whatever. I don't know that they make that much of a difference when what you're doing is cleaning off plastic printed or resin printed parts. But these are good for cleaning up holes or corners. These are really good if you have to use a brim on an FDM print. These are really good at getting rid of that brim. So how these work I don't know if I'm going to be able to show much on here. There's not a lot of flashing or anything I would think that I would need to remove. But let's say I had a brim on the bottom of this thing, then I can, you know, go around here, and these swivel, right? These little deals swivel, and I can clean up whatever edge. It's not going to work on this very well, and I don't have anything that it is going to work on very well up here. But these are good for removing, particularly on FDM prints, a brim or some kind of part that's a little too it has burrs on it. So maybe that hole, actually this hole does have a little bit of, you can't tell probably in the picture. Yeah, actually, you see the little white edge inside there. I don't know if this will fit in there yet. Well, it will. So you could clean that up if you needed to. And so these are pretty good for cleaning that sort of thing. So you've got some overexposure or a brim or something like that where it's just hard to remove. These things generally make pretty short work of any of that sort of stuff. They even have some that are specific for 3D printing, but I don't think they're any different than the others. Maybe the amount of edge, you know, on the cutting edge here might be sharper or a different angle or something like that for one material versus another. I've never used a special one. Here's a actually very fancy kit that has a variety of tools on it, not just the traditional deburring tool, but it's got reamers and all sorts of other stuff. Now that's way more expensive than what, you know, the $10 that these other things are. I think I have this one too. That one looks familiar. I know I have another. There, look, there you can kind of see how they work. That's what they do. Now that's a piece of metal that's being deburred right there. But you can use the same idea for the plastic resin or FDM or whatever. All right, so that's another good tool. Here's a tool that, let's say that you need to clean out a hole and it's smaller than the deburring tool, or you need to drill a hole or whatever. You obviously have drills. The problem with most electric type tools is that they go too fast. And that's not too bad for resin, but resin's a soft material. And if you try drilling with a regular drill into something like that, you're probably going to way overdo what you meant to do. So they make these. This is a pin vise, and it's basically just a handle with some kind of collet in it, and you can put small drill bits in there, or other kind of tools, but usually drill bits. Oh, my feed went out. It's back now. Oh, all right. Sometimes it's raining here, so I'm replying to the chat. It's raining here, and for some reason, sometimes it goes out and then it comes back pretty quickly. So I'll try to keep an eye on it. It didn't actually make the sound it normally makes, though. Normally it dings and tells me that it's not sending anything. Right now it says excellent, so we'll keep going. Hopefully we didn't miss a whole lot. So, oh yeah, pin vise. So the pin vise, these are, you know, manual. So you get to control how fast you spin the drill bit and how much pressure you apply. So this is, you know, a metal one, but they make wooden ones, you know, wooden handles. They make all kinds of different ones. If you really wanted, let's see if I can find this. I'm not sure where I can find it. There we go. If you really don't like the idea of the pin vise and you really want a drill, what you need for resins and plastics is something that goes really slowly. And there is one, at least one. This little guy right here. I have one like this, but it's blue. I don't see it right now. I'm looking on the shelf. It normally is, and I don't see it. I think it's in a box somewhere. But it's actually a kit, so it's like a model kit. You have to build it, but I think that's the same one here. This one may be pre-assembled. I don't know. The one I have looks a lot like that, and it's from the same company, but it's actually a kit you have to build. But the point with it is that it's a slow rotating tool. So if you don't have like your Dremel, even the slow speed on your Dremel is too fast, or your drill is too fast, and you do want, maybe you have to have a lot of holes to drill, then this is the one thing that I've seen that is meant for slow rotation. You still get to drill or whatever. A little bit expensive. That one's $40. I don't remember if the one that I have is that expensive or not, but I know that that one is meant for drilling into plastics and resins and things like that, that if you used a high-speed tool, there's a chance they'll just melt, and that's no good. So let's see. So these little pin vices, I would just use a pin vise unless you have a lot of holes to deal with. They work pretty well. Let's see if I have any other tool type things up here. Sort of. So another thing, not really on the sanding or finishing side of stuff, but on the, you've got a part, particular FDM part in this case, that maybe it printed partway through and you had a failure, but it was a really long print and you want to save the print, so you got to print the rest of it and glue them together. So obviously there are glues, super glue and some of the epoxies and that sort of stuff that you can glue them together with. But there's also two other ways you can do joining. Well, actually there's more than two, but I have two here. So one thing you could do is you could get you one of the 3D pins. So this is basically a extruder. So it's got a little nozzle here. You can usually use PLA or PETG on these things. It's got a little heater that will melt the filament, and it has a drive motor that pushes the filament out the end. So the filament comes in this end, gets heated up and pushed out here, and it's all manual as far as where the filament goes. You're driving it, and the machine, the tool, you have some control here on how hot to melt at, what's your melt temperature and what speed to extrude at. So these can be used for joining two pieces together with more filament. So instead of relying on the adhesive glue or whatever, then you've got the actual same material just melted together. You can also do a similar thing with, I have a cheapy little soldering iron, and they usually come, it's just a little, this is like a, I don't know, $20 one maybe. They usually come with a variety of tips on them, this kind anyway, where some are flat. You can see a flat one in there, a lot of different shapes for kind of ironing out parts to connect them together, or to maybe you've used the 3D pin and now you want to flatten it out with this before you sand it, so you can do stuff like that. So those are kind of some relatively cheap. Those 3D pins now are, I don't know, let's see, you can probably find one for $30. Let's see what we have. Yeah, exactly $30 for the first one that pops up anyway. Well, $29.99. They use regular filament, so you can get the filament off your roll and send it straight into the pin. Most all the pins that I've seen are 1.75 millimeter. I haven't seen any of the 3 millimeter pins, but I don't know. These are about all the same as far as I can tell. Obviously, they're different designs, but they work about the same. Some of them have slightly better features on the display and on the variety of materials they can use possibly, but I think I have 3 of them. I have the very first one that was a Kickstarter. I have that one you just saw, and then I have one other one, and they're all about the same. Even the very first one is not that much, it's bigger, but it's not that much different from what they have now. So these are not bad tools to have once you're printing quite a bit, because they do make repairing a print, FDM print, a lot easier, because you can better join parts together if you need to versus what glue will do. If you need to glue stuff, I think I've showed this before. There is a site, this to that, and this to that.com. Basically, if you need to glue something to something else, then it will give you a variety of adhesives and epoxies and all kinds of stuff that will hold those things together, and it'll tell you which ones are better. So if you wanted to do plastic to plastic, then there's a variety of things. But I will say, so like maybe you have done some models before, like plastic model kits before, and you have some glue that comes in a tube. Let's see, do I have any of that out here? I do not see any. Oh, well, this is not, but it comes in a tube like this, or maybe they're in a little glass bottle. This is not glue, but that particular kind of glue for those model kits, plastic model kits, those are made of styrene, the model kits are. And what that glue does is it's not actually glue, it's a solvent, and it dissolves or it softens up the styrene so that it can remelt to the other styrene pieces. So that stuff will not work on PLA and PETG and all that kind of material. It works on styrene. So be careful. Some glues that work on some plastics aren't actually adhesive glues. They are solvents that won't work on your PLA or PETG unless it's a solvent for those materials. And the solvent for PLA is actually pretty nasty, so you're probably not going to be using that. And it does this, this little site does give you many it's kind of hard to give advice here because there are so many types of plastics. You really need to know specific plastics. In general, PLA is fine to glue with super glue for most things. Super glue is a brittle connection usually. I will give you a general piece of gluing advice, adhesive advice. The longer the glue takes to set up and dry, the stronger it will be. So stuff that, the 5 minutes and the instant cure and all those kind of things, they'll hold, but they're going to be a brittle type of hold. And so you can snap them later on. Sometimes you do that on purpose because you just want something kind of in place for a while. And so that's not the point of it. You just need it to hold it in place so that you can put other things together. And then super glue is fine for that. But the longer drying stuff, like the epoxies that dry longer, or some of the glues that dry longer, some of the Gorilla Glue type stuff, usually you have to clamp those, right? Because they want to expand or something like that and get out of place. So you have to clamp most things that take longer to dry. But those will be a stronger bond in general. All right. Since I got that tube out, let's go to that route. So sometimes, actually a lot of times, you've done your sanding. So that you cleaned off your part, got your, all your flashing that's in the way, you got that removed. Maybe you cleaned out some holes or whatever. You've done some of the rough filing and maybe even some of the rough sanding. Now, it's still not smooth as you want it. So this is really true on PLA because you've got the layer lines. These kind of things, there are layer lines, but remember the layers are 0.05 millimeters. So normally you don't worry too much about those, but maybe you do, depending on your application. So you've done that. Usually the next step is you want to fill in, add material to kind of fill in some of the layer lines, or maybe there's just a bad spot in the print that didn't print right. It's a hole. And so there's a couple. I've got this, I've got this, I've got this. These are some samples of fillers. So, this one was on sale. Actually, no, this is not one. This is there are tubes like this that This is actually a metal and wood cement. So, but there's tubes. So let's not look at that. There's tubes like this that have filler. That's basically what's in here. It's a putty. This you get from like an AutoZone or a place like that for a car repair type of thing, but it's a spot putty. They do make two-part stuff or multi-part stuff that you have to mix it together, you know, a base with some kind of hardener, and then you can apply that. Usually, unless you're making really big stuff, like you're printing helmets or something that's really large, usually those are a bit overkill for a model, particularly something this size. But even bigger than that, I would, you know, wait for it to be a pretty large model before I went in with some of the two-part things. These are fine for most of the stuff you're normally going to print. I do see a lot of people on the internet, when they're using these, I think they put way too much on. So the point of these fillers isn't to like coat the whole thing. Normally, if you're having to coat the whole thing, then there's a better product probably. And then I'll show you two things that you might do in that case. These are more, to me, these are more for, I've got a blemish here or there, or I've got some layer lines I just can't smooth with sanding, that kind of thing. And so what I normally do with these, any one of these, you know, imagine that's one of the testers type of fillers, is you get a little bit out, you use something like one of these, you know, rigid but still flexible, you know, a little bit flexible plastic spatula type applicators. Maybe you have one of these from a resin printer, and you try to scrape most of it off and leave only the part that's filling in the hole. You're going to have to go back and sand anyway. These things are almost always going to sand faster than your base, even if your base is resin. Certainly if your base is PLA or PETG, these are going to sand way faster. So you have to be careful with sanding. That's one of the reasons I use some sort of sanding block or pad when necessary, to try and make sure that I'm sanding the high spots and not trying to like contour. Like if you just take your finger and sand, your finger's pretty smushy most of the time, and it's going to contour to the shape you're trying to sand, and normally you're trying to sand it flat in some way. Maybe not flat like a plane, but flat in some way. And these things, something like this, will help distribute the pressure from your finger or your hand over a larger area and just sand the high spots. So normally what I would do is put this on the spot and then use some kind of block. Well, first scrape most of it off with this and just leave it in the hole, and then use some kind of sanding block, this or one of these that we found over here, you know, one of these type of things that you've printed yourself, and sand across that spot. I don't like when I see people sanding, you know, in one little direction. You know, you want to sand across the whole area there to feather your repair into a larger area versus one little tiny spot. So that would be the next step. Now, I said I wouldn't coat the whole model with these things. These materials, they're not the same material as your base, your resin or your PLA. And so if there's any amount of flex in your model, even if it's a small amount of flex, you stand the risk of, if this is really thick on your model, then it's going to flex at a different rate than your PLA or your resin and crack and maybe even come out. So you don't want thick coats of this stuff in general, or Bondo. You know, this is a Bondo product, but the Bondo that comes in a can that you mix up, you don't want thick coats of that stuff because it can crack or it can just pop out of the hole or whatever. So this is for thin, relatively thin coats of stuff. Some of this kind of putty can be a little bit thicker. This stuff you really want pretty thin. In fact, it even says glazing and spot putty, but it's meant to be thinner. If you're needing to coat the whole model, then what I would do is there are Some of these high build primers, this one's sandable, but some of them say high build. I think Mr. Surfacer, this stuff's more expensive, but if you can find it, it can be pretty thick also. And if you need really thick, then they make this kind of thing where it's basically a resin. You can kind of see the shiny spot here that you paint onto the model, and you'll lose some of your fine details, but it will cover the whole model. So this is a FDM print with this resin, two-part resin on top of it. It self-levels pretty well, and it's easy to sand. So you're kind of making a shell around all of your printed PLA or whatever it might be, and then sanding the shell smooth if you want to sand it at all. A lot of times it comes out really pretty smooth. It's it's kind of messy because it's a resin. You mix it up and you got to paint it on and all that kind of stuff. I assume they still make that. That's an old version right there. Let's see what they still have. What's it called? XTC 3D. Yeah, they still have it out there. So, it's the part A, part B. You mix it up, paint it on. $40 for that size container, which should last a while for most prints. Looks like that's the only one of them that I'm seeing right now. So that looks like the only one. Yeah, I bought it in 2015. So I assume mine's still good. Usually those two-part things, since they don't actually mix together until you mix them together, they usually last quite a while. That's a long time though. I don't know if 2015 is still good. But we could find out. Not on this stream, but because it is kind of, I have to be careful with it because it is a messy thing. And it does actually create quite a bit of heat. So the reaction, it's an exothermic reaction when you mix part A and B, and so it does create some heat that you have to be at least aware of that it will do. So if you put it on really thick, then it's a chance that creates enough heat to deform your part. I haven't ever had that happen, but I suppose it could happen. Let's see. So those are our putties. Oh, so on our putties, back over here, you sand those. You can wet or dry sand most putties once they cure. These things, they set up pretty fast. Minutes, like 5 minutes, and I think they're sandable. Maybe more than that. You'd have to read the exact thing, but it's relatively fast. Wow, that's tiny writing. I don't know if I can read that. Probably says in there somewhere how long to let it set up. But in minutes, they're sandable. And if you do want to prime, now this is sandable primer. I like this kind because I like that particular nozzle. What's on this one's just your regular kind of nozzle. The primers, if you have a small, like this guy, object, then the primer doesn't, you're probably not going to sand it a lot, but some of the ones that say sandable or high build, things like that, there's a Rust-Oleum, I think it might say high build, this is Duplicolor. You certainly should sand them if it's a flat surface, a larger flat surface. Yes, you should sand those. In these, I actually a lot of times use one of these kind of surfacer primers, and then I don't sand it much, if any at all, because it's kind of hard to sand down in there. Maybe if the texture of the surface looks really bad, I'll sand it in spots, or maybe I'll just spot sand areas where I want it to look a little smoother. But in general, I don't bother with that. But if you're trying to flatten something, you're making a helmet and you want it to be shiny, then a coat of primer, then go back to sanding. If you wet sand that, then let it dry, get it all dry so there's no water trapped in your crevices of your model. And then one thing you can do is if you can get two different colors of the primer, hit it again with the other color, so maybe a dark gray and a light gray, and sand again, and any high and low spots will show up because you sand through one color and you can see the other color primer underneath it, and you can say, oh, well, that was a high spot. Or if one area always stays the most recent color, that's a low spot. Assuming that you're using some sort of sanding block, probably on a helmet I would use something bigger than this. Let me see if I can show you some sanding blocks that you can buy. Let's see. So they do make these kind. The thing I don't like, these are fine. You know, these little sanding sponges, they're fine. But they're a little more expensive, and you can't, you know, once they're used, you're kind of done with them. I was looking for a particular kind. Maybe if I type sanding pad, that would give me more of what I'm looking for. No, these kind of things. So, and it doesn't have, I mean, you know, do you need this exact thing? No, but what you're looking for is something, if you're doing a larger area than our little figure over here, then you're trying to spread out your uneven hand, trying to spread it out into a larger area, and so these little kind of sponge pads will do that, and you'll get a better result on your large surfaces. It does take some practice on, you know, what direction do you sand. Basically, just don't sand in straight lines. Like, don't sand in straight lines probably ever. That's generally bad to do, unless you're trying to do like a crevice, like an inside corner or something maybe. Of these, the ones that I would say are stuff like that. And then they make these in a lot of different shapes too. Or, you know, these, you could print some of these in TPU and have a lot of different shapes too. But in general, you want to, I don't like sanding with just my hand, because most of the time, unless I'm doing something super specific to like my finger is the exact right shape, then I want to use some kind of block to try and block it out into a flat surface. All right, so we've got it sanded. Maybe we put 2 coats of primer on there. You really, so if I were doing a helmet, so a larger object, you really want your final primer surface to be the right color. So depending on what color you're going next, you want that primer to at least match that. In general, there's like a light gray that's more or less white-ish. There's a dark gray that's more or less black, and then there are red tone primers. Then there's some others, there's some yellows and stuff, but those are your kind of general categories of primer. And you want that final coat to not have patches in it. You know, you don't want to sand through it or whatever. You do want to sand the final coat if you're wanting it to be shiny. And it should be a nice undercoat for the actual top coat color that you want. So if you want to print a white Stormtrooper helmet, you probably want the light gray primer on the outer surface. If you're printing a red helmet, then you probably want the rust colored primers to kind of be a nice undercoat for that. All right, so we've got that far. Maybe you want something to be shiny. So there are chrome paints. So we can probably find some kind of chrome paint on Amazon here. Let's see. Here we go. You know, there's one, chrome paint. Now I'll talk about these pens in a minute. There's a Rust-Oleum metallic bright chrome. Almost always, these have, you know, really shiny caps. Like it's going to be that shiny, and it can be pretty shiny, but you do have to prepare the under chrome surface. So if you want a shiny surface like this one is showing me, if you want something like that, first of all, it's going to be hard to get with a spray paint, but you can get close. The key to it is underneath this. So I've done my priming, I've got everything smooth. First of all, if I want it to be shiny, I need it to be pretty smooth, or else it's going to not look shiny. If I have a non-smooth surface, rough texture, and I try to put chrome on top of that, it's just not going to look shiny because it's not smooth. So first you do a lot of prep on sanding, and then usually for something like this, you put a gloss black paint. So you spray paint gloss black and then you put the chrome on top of that, and that'll give it a deeper chrome look to it. I said I was going to talk about those pins, like this little pin right here. These things are actually really pretty good. Here's one. So these liquid chrome pins, I don't know if this one, I mean, it sounds like it's still got stuff in there, but let's see if I have something that might want to be chrome around here. Oh, I know. So back here, there, right there, you can't tell. He's all out of focus, but that's an old Voltron, but I lost his blazing sword. So we're going to, I printed one a long time ago. It's not the right size or anything. It's not even that good of a print because this print was probably, I don't know, 12 years ago or something. So it's pretty bad quality print, so I don't mind messing it up. But let's see if we can make it a little bit chromy with this. You didn't want to let it go. It's a little bit dusty, so let me wipe it off. I also see that I only ever printed half of it. So, oh, these are also pretty handy for cleaning up stuff. So I never, this is just flat, so I never printed the other half, I guess. We need to fix that. All right, so there's our little plastic. So no prep at all on this thing. I'm just going to paint on it with these. So these are paint pens, but the chrome in them is actually really pretty good. I don't know how well it's going to show or work on this surface because, you know, it's a FDM print. This is just some green PLA. I guess that's the color I had. So you can definitely see layer lines. Oh, look, there's a little remainder of maybe a brim or something. So that would be something we could probably clean up with our deburring tool. Kind of, there we go. There's something, that one, there's something right there that's, I don't remember. I mean, like I said, this was a long time ago, so I don't really remember what was going on there. That might be annoying to hear on the feed, so let me do that over here. Another good tool, I didn't get this one out, but a scraper. A scraper usually, I've got to zoom out. Scraper usually has a kind of a sharp-ish edge, like it's curled over, but they will, a scraper is a good tool, similar to this thing. This is not a scraper, but I'm using it kind of like a scraper. All right, so we could do all that kind of stuff. Let's see. I'll probably have to start this pen. Oh, no, it's ready to go. All right, so these things, you do paint them like paint pens, but it's more like you let the paint pool and you're just kind of driving it around. It looks like mine has kind of separated over time. Like it's not mixed up very well. This is an older pen. Let me see if I can get it to mix better than that one, because that just kind of looks gray. It would, these also help, you know, the undercoat, this being green, is not helping my chrome. So if I painted it with a gloss black, it would look a little better. But part of it is the paint itself is not mixed very well. Here's, I did find, here's a black chrome. That would be a good, so 82 cents on clearance. That would be a good undercoat also. Let's see if we got any better. No. Not getting a very good chrome finish on here. We might have to come back to that and get some better chrome paint.
Yeah. Part of it is that the paint pen is really old, and it's not. Yeah, it's just kind of separated. I might have to get a new one. This brand is generally good, but again, this is a really old paint pen. You can kind of see it is becoming chrome-ish, but we'll let it dry some and come back to it. The one thing with these is that if you have to let them dry a long time, like a week, before touching them doesn't rub off some of the effect. But I actually think that this may be beyond its prime. I don't know. There's a little bit of shininess. I think we could do better though. All right, put that back. We need to make Voltron a new sword anyway. Let's see, what else do I have over here? Oh, so other metals. So not all metals are kind of shiny. There are other ways to do some metal that is just kind of the metallic effect. So these, there's 3 of these. There's probably others. These are the 3 I have. Rub and Buff. These are like little wax materials that have metal particles in them. So you finish out your model like you were going to chrome it or whatever, and you paint it up. I usually paint a gloss black again, and then you take whichever, do I want it to look dark. So if I were doing a dark one, I wouldn't do the gloss black. I would do some other base coat. So do I want to give it a bunch of shadows? Do I want it to look silverish? Do I want it to look goldish? And you take a super tiny amount of this on a rag or whatever, and you just rub, like it says, rub and buff. So you just rub it on, and then you buff it out. And I've got here Skeletor. So he was just a 3D print. Looks like I printed him in some gray FDM PLA, I assume. Then he's shiny because I think I did primer him some. Probably didn't sand a whole lot because I can still see a lot of layer lines. You can see them right in there, Yeah, you can definitely see them back here. So I must have sanded a little more on here than on the back. But then you paint him whatever color, in this case gloss black, and it looks like I took some of this and just kind of went over, and it leaves this whatever color it is, gold, mostly on your model, but it doesn't completely like cover it up. So it gives it the effect of kind of an older metal type thing. If you want it not as shiny, then you don't do gloss black, you do semi-gloss black or whatever, and it won't be quite as shiny. His face there I probably did with the silver, and you just kind of super tiny amounts, like I've hardly used any of this stuff, super tiny amounts, and just kind of rub it on, and then you take another cloth and buff it off of there. So you're trying to remove some of it, and like it does stay pretty well. There's no clear coat or anything on this. It stays, once you put it on there, pretty much stays in place. So those are pretty easy, sometimes hard to find. I'm looking on here. So there's a little kit with 3 brown tones. There's a kit with a whole bunch of tones, but they're kind of expensive. This must be the kit I have, although maybe I only have 3, I think. So I don't know which one. Maybe I just am missing one. I don't know. Sometimes you can get them at Hobby Lobby if you happen to see them there. They're a little bit on the expensive side. $10 for 1 tube, but they last forever. You really don't use a lot of them at all. So if it's something that you're thinking that you'll want to make a lot of pieces, then that's a way to do it. Let's talk about, let's see what else. I'm just looking at the stuff that I've got up here. Sandpaper we did. What else is over here? Talked about, oh, this stuff is Mod Podge. Usually that's kind of like a decoupage type thing. You're pasting a bunch of pieces of paper onto a page or whatever. But this one is called Dimensional Magic. And what it does is it is sort of like a clear, hard glue. And you put it on a surface that you want to have kind of a bubble effect, like a lens on top of it or something like that. And it has a high surface tension, so it bubbles up and then dries into like this clear, hard dome on top of whatever you put it on. So if you need something that looks like a lens on top of a thing, or just a shiny bubble on top of something, then that's a pretty good way to do it. It works pretty well. Let's see what else we got over here. These are useful. Not these particular ones, but this stuff. So most of what I've been talking about paint-wise has been talking about, primers and all, but acrylic markers. So these kind of things. This is, I think this set. This is this set. Whatever that. I don't know how you say that, but came up from Amazon. It was on sale for like $25, and there's, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 30 markers, so not even $1 a marker. Let's see if it's still on sale. And these are the acrylic paint markers. There are alcohol markers too. It's $30 right now. So it's this set right here. So it's still not terribly bad. It's $1 a marker. These are acrylic markers, so all paints, whatever kind of paint they are, they have some kind of solvent in them that evaporates and leaves the pigment behind. And so acrylic markers, the solvent is usually some kind of water based thing. I guess there's might be other chemicals. I don't know the entire composition of the paint, but they clean up with water, and they're not gonna melt your plastics or resins or anything. So they're a good way to get color onto your model without having to get paintbrushes and all that kind of stuff out. And so these particular ones are acrylic, and they do have the pointy end and a broader end so that you can cover bigger or smaller areas. I wouldn't want to do a really large model with them, but stuff, even this guy, I've lost him now. I don't know where he went. Where did you go? Well, wherever he went, something that size, that would be fine for these things. I'd still prime. Oh, here he is. I'd still primer just to get a nice surface, although this is already a decent surface. In this case, I would want to primer with a thin primer, not a high build one, because I don't want to lose all the detail. This is a resin print. It already looks pretty good. I just need to clean up a few spots where the supports were. So I'd use a lighter weight primer. Let me see if I can find one of those. Oh, not printer. This one. So one of these fine surface primers, one that doesn't say filler, doesn't say sandable, doesn't say high build, just to get the surface that I wanted. I wouldn't want to paint directly on the resin usually. So I'd put that on there, and then I would probably do two things. I probably would not, although I could, probably would not start with these markers, but you could. I would probably, since I have them, start with something, maybe something like one of these kind of paints. These are really thin paints, so these are speed paints. These are also old, so I don't know what the current version is named, but there are paints out there that are acrylic, that are speed paints, or they're I saw some in Hobby Lobby, some of the craft for like 52 cents they're thin. So what they do is, when they're thin, is what I would do here is I would paint a dark primer. So a dark but fine primer, so not a high build one. And so since he's dark,
then I can paint on top of that, and these thinner paints will not be able to cover up all of the dark recesses. They'll kind of just cover the high spots, and the darker recesses will stay dark like shadows. And if that was the look I was going for, that'll give kind of the look like this guy, you know, where he's got darker recesses in there and then lighter spots on top. Although I think this guy I probably painted with a light primer and did the opposite. But you could do that, and then I could go back with the markers and color in the really bright spots. That'd probably be how I'd paint him. Maybe we'll try painting him, probably not on the stream, but in stages. You can I'll show you what I did one time, and then I'll do some more stuff and bring him back. We don't have that many meetings left though. Let's see, what else is up here? I think, oh, there's a couple of paint brushes. So typically just these kind of paint brushes. This is an old raggedy one, so you can kind of see it's kind of not, it's lost its edge there. These are good for a technique called dry brushing if you want to do that. That's basically where you put a tiny amount of paint on the paintbrush and then you wipe most of it off. So you put a tiny amount of paint on and you wipe it off. So where'd my guy? I lost him again. So he's painted and he's got the darker tones on him. I get a really light tone here, and I just kind of drag the brush across the ridges, and those ridges will grab some of the little bit of paint that's on the brush and collect it, and you'll get highlights. These kind of brushes for just painting the bulk areas. Usually my brushes are just whatever I find that's on clearance somewhere. Not these though. So these are cheap, 49 cents. But these you can get, I use these for glue. But look at, you can even see in the package, you're not going to get much control with those frayed ends or anything as far as paint goes. So I wouldn't paint anything with these, but they're good for glue because, you know, the whole pack here is 49 cents. Or well, it was $2, but I got it for 49 cents, and you can throw it away when you're done if you don't want to try cleaning it out from the glue. So they're good for applying glue and adhesives and things like that that don't actually need a pretty surface. All right, I think we have 3 minutes, so we're not going to have time to do our fans. So I think on Monday's stream, we'll probably try to get in there and put these fans in. On our, it's off the screen right now, but on our Voron V0 with the dead fan. So we'll try and do that on Monday. We're getting close to the end, so if there's a particular thing that you want to see more of or that we haven't covered at all, then let me know. Send an email, put it in Discord, put it in the chat, although I'm about to close the chat down, or put it in the comments to the video, and I'll see if we can find a way to talk about whatever it is that we haven't talked about or that you want to hear more about. Otherwise, we'll be back Monday, 9:30, and we'll carry on.